Hi, random recapped here. Today we're diving into a TV series called The Bear. The story revolves around a young chef named Carmy who returns to Chicago after a family tragedy to take over his family's sandwich shop. Carmy, who's used to the fine dining world, must now navigate the challenges of running a small, chaotic sandwich shop. Without further ado, let's get into it. The series opens with a man standing on a bridge, where he notices a small white cage. Curious, he approaches and opens it, only to be attacked by a large bear. But this turns out to be just a dream, as Carmy Berzatto, the chef, wakes up abruptly at 6 a.m. He quickly prepares to meet a meat delivery. However, instead of the 90 kilograms of meat he ordered, the delivery guy only brings 11 kilograms, already paid for by someone named Lou. Desperate to keep the restaurant running, despite having no money, Carmy begins selling his personal belongings to get enough meat. He even organizes a ball-breaker tournament to attract customers. After finally securing more meat from another supplier, he orders his sous chef, Tina, to start prepping ingredients. While working, Carmy is approached by a woman named Sydney, who says she called earlier about an internship. Intrigued, Carmy looks over her resume and is impressed. He asks why she wants to work there, and Sydney replies that the restaurant has been her favorite since childhood. Happy with her answer, Carmy accepts her as an intern and explains that the restaurant operates from 11 a.m. to 9 p.m., with a break at 2 p.m. for meals. Carmy then gathers the staff, including Marcus, the bread specialist, Tina, Jeff, and Richie, his late brother Michael's best friend, who has been helping at the restaurant for years. However, Richie is skeptical of Carmy's ability to run the restaurant and questions his decision to hire Sydney. Tensions rise when Richie confronts Carmy, accusing him of ruining the restaurant. He compares Carmy unfavorably to Michael, saying that Michael built the restaurant into something good, while Carmy is only destroying it. In a heated moment, Carmy asks why Michael didn't pass the restaurant to Richie, leaving him momentarily speechless. Determined to prove himself, Carmy returns to the kitchen and urges his team to work quickly, as they only have 1 hour before opening. However, Richie continues to disrupt the flow, frustrating everyone. Carmy becomes so consumed with the restaurant that he doesn't even notice his hands bleeding until someone points it out. His drive to turn the failing restaurant into something great pushes him to his limits. In a brief respite, Carmy visits his sister, who suggests he sell the restaurant and return to the fine dining world. Carmy refuses, believing he can rebuild it into something better. Back in the kitchen, he praises Marcus for creating a perfectly soft bread dough and even offers some sample sandwiches to the staff, who are impressed by how he transformed cheap meat into a delicious dish. While the team takes a lunch break, Carmy stays behind, waiting for customers. As the crowd outside grows restless, they start banging on the restaurant windows. Furious, Carmy confronts them but ends up getting beaten. Richie intervenes, firing a gun into the air to disperse the crowd and taking control of the situation, promising the winner of the ball-breaker competition a year's supply of Italian ice cream. Although Carmy is impressed by Richie's ability to handle the chaos, the tension between them remains unresolved. After this, we see Carmy still hard at work, long past 3 p.m., showing his relentless dedication to saving the restaurant. The scene then shifts to Carmy's time working at a high-end restaurant, where all the assistant chefs obeyed his every command. However, Carmy wasn't the only top chef there. Other chefs, including one who didn't like the way Carmy affected his calculations, constantly harassed him. Even as Carmy focused on plating the dishes perfectly, this chef would yell at him relentlessly, going as far as telling him that he deserved to die. The harsh treatment Carmy endured in the luxury restaurant carried over into how he runs his sandwich shop. He frequently yells at his staff, demanding they work faster and more efficiently, without realizing that everyone is already doing their best. One day, while the staff is cleaning the kitchen, their ice cream machine breaks. Richie, the only one capable of fixing it, is assigned the task. After a long day, Richie and Carmy share a cigarette outside the restaurant, after all the other employees have left. Richie stays behind to clean every last stain in the restaurant, ensuring everything is spotless and orderly before heading home. Exhausted, Carmi finally gets a chance to eat the bread he had been too busy to taste earlier. Afterward, Carmi collapses on the sofa and watches a tutorial on making perfect bread dough. As he drifts to sleep, the harsh voice of his former chef echoes in his mind, reminding him of the criticism he faced. This triggers a dream where he almost sets his apartment on fire due to his own carelessness. Fortunately, it's just a dream, and morning arrives, signaling another day of work at the restaurant. While Carmi is busy, Sydney approaches him to discuss her performance. She feels she has proven herself and asks to be paid as a full-time employee. She presents a detailed breakdown of the restaurant's expenses, suggesting they serve lunch from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. and dinner from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. She also proposes sourcing ingredients directly from farmers to cut costs, as the main price hike comes from delivery fees. Sydney recommends hiring someone to handle deliveries, but with the limited staff, Marcus is already busy, and the others, Ibra, Jeff, and Tina, can't drive. While Richie's driver's license is suspended, Carmi is left without many options. As Carmi mulls over Sydney's suggestions, he overhears a conversation between Richie and an older woman who introduces herself as Nancy from the Chicago Health Department. She's replacing Ron, who recently passed away, and Carmi quickly steps in, worried that Richie might mishandle the situation. Nancy's inspection turns into a nightmare for the restaurant. She discovers a large hole in the wall, criticizes the lack of hot water in the sink needed to sterilize utensils, and finds a cigarette pack left on top of the stove. Not only could this cause an explosion, but it also poses a contamination risk. After her inspection, Nancy gives the restaurant a C rating. Everyone is upset, but Carmi is especially angry at Richie, who is responsible for many of the issues. Richie had patched the hole with paper and left the cigarette pack on the stove. Carmi orders him to go buy some plaster to fix the hole. Richie argues that he can't drive because of his suspended license, so Carmi tells Sydney to take him. Despite the C rating, Carmi isn't embarrassed. He even proudly posts the inspection results on the front window. But then he notices a man who terrifies him, Jimmy. Jimmy is someone both Carmi and Michael owe money to. Back at the restaurant, Jimmy explains that Michael owed him $300,000, a debt Carmi hadn't known about. Jimmy had even considered breaking Carmi's legs over the unpaid debt, but he now offers to buy the restaurant for a fraction of its value. Carmi refuses, determined not to sell and to pay off the debt himself. Meanwhile, Sydney and Richie head to the store to buy plaster. As they search for supplies, Richie rants about Carmi, telling Sydney that Michael didn't want Carmi in the restaurant because he was always difficult to deal with. Curious, Sydney asks what really happened to Michael, and Richie reveals that Michael committed suicide 4 months ago by shooting himself in the head. Back at the restaurant, Jimmy continues to discuss the financial mess Michael left behind. Carmi confesses that he's been using his own money to cover the restaurant's expenses, including utilities, which are overdue. As Sydney and Richie return, Richie gets a call from his daughter, and during the conversation, he admits his mistake with the cigarettes and that he bought the wrong plaster. Luckily, Sydney had picked up the correct supplies. Carmi, meanwhile, grows increasingly anxious about how to pay off the restaurant's debts. He even calls Pete, his sister Sugar's husband, to ask for a loan, but Pete dodges the question and passes the phone to Sugar. Despite desperately needing help, Carmi can't bring himself to ask his sister for money and instead changes the subject. When Richie returns to the restaurant to fix the hole, he finds that someone else has already done the job. Inside the patched wall, he discovers a note. As the team prepares for another busy day, they receive a flood of orders, and spirits are high. Sydney is officially hired as a full-time employee, marking a new chapter for the restaurant. Carmi steps outside to smoke and calm his nerves, but as he reaches for his cigarettes, he realizes they're missing. He searches his pockets but comes up empty-handed. It's then that he remembers. He had left them on the stove while cleaning the kitchen earlier. The scene continues with Carmi sitting quietly, gazing at the beauty of the ocean. It turns out that his intention was to attend a support group for people struggling with alcohol addiction. As he listens intently, A woman shares her story about how she manages to control her cravings for alcohol and the issues she faces at home. She explains that they can't control or escape it. The only thing they can do is fully recognize that alcohol is harmful to them. After attending the group meeting, Carmi returns to the restaurant to serve the customers. Today, there's a crowd, and the chefs are starting to get frustrated with each other. Richie, in particular, keeps shouting when he needs something, even though Carmi has already asked everyone to remain calm despite the pressure from the demanding customers. When the day ends, Carmi tries to rest but fails. Instead, he opens a book about alcohol being labeled as a family disease. He flips through the pages until he decides to head back to the restaurant. When he arrives, several chefs, including Marcus, are already there, having come in early. Marcus asks why Carmi is there so early, and Carmi admits he couldn't sleep. Carmi then notices that Marcus has put up one of his recipes, aiming to become a better pastry chef. This sparks a conversation, with Carmi sharing the story behind the recipe and how it was designed to serve 12 people. He explains the importance of consistency when stirring sugar, ensuring it doesn't overcook, and how they need to use a large amount of sweet wine from Japan. After talking with Marcus, Carmi calls Sydney into his office. He informs her of his decision to make her head chef. He no longer wants to follow the old-school methods Michael used when running the beef. Instead, he wants to implement the French Brigade system, with Sydney leading the kitchen while Carmi focuses on managing the business. Initially, Sydney is hesitant, but her ambition to end the hierarchy at the restaurant pushes her to accept the role. Afterward, Carmi hands out new aprons to the chefs, signifying the upcoming changes. He also gathers the team and explains the French Brigade system, assigning each chef to a specialized role. Carmi will remain the head chef, Marcus will handle pastries, and Sydney will oversee sauces. They will also evaluate their performance after each service to minimize mistakes. Although some chefs, like Tina and Ebra, resist the changes at first, they eventually agree once they realize the new system actually lightens their workload. Later, back in his office, Carmi receives a phone call from a man named Nico. Shortly after, Richie comes in, asking about the caller. Carmi explains who Nico is, and Richie offers to handle the situation, telling Carmi to let him take care of it. Carmi, looking to take a break, heads back to his addiction support group. With Sydney now the head chef, she begins to feel the weight of the role. Time blurs as she constantly moves, overseeing the kitchen, and though she briefly complains, she quickly refocuses on her tasks. She corrects the chef's work, like asking Tina to chop onions more finely and pushing Marcus to improve the softness of the bread. But despite Sydney's hard work, Carmi remains unsatisfied. He scolds her when the onions turn out too soft. Sydney explains that she assigned Tina the task, but Tina had neglected it because she didn't fully respect Sydney's leadership. Taking responsibility, Sydney goes back to chopping the onions herself, only to find them missing afterward. She searches the kitchen, but no one confesses to taking them, until Marcus reveals he had hidden the onions as a prank. Though upset, Sydney tries to stay composed. Marcus apologizes and offers to help lower the food stock with her. Sydney declines, but when she accidentally drops the stock, Marcus steps in to help clean up the mess. The chaos makes Sydney realize how dysfunctional the beef really is, compounded by Carmi's constant struggle with the debts Michael left behind. The workday feels overwhelming for Sydney, especially when she cuts her hand with a knife. Yet, she refuses to show any weakness in front of the others. During her break, she steps outside to enjoy a meal prepared by Ebra, joined by Carmi. Sydney admits to him that she feels like he has deliberately left her to handle things on her own. When she points out flaws in the brigade system, Carmi doesn't intervene to help her at all. However, Carmi explains that he was testing her ability to manage her emotions under intense pressure. He assures her that she can handle it and that the chefs will eventually respect her for it. He also predicts that tonight will bring in a large number of customers. True to his word, the restaurant is flooded with customers that evening. After the busy night, Carmi finds himself alone once again. He listens to a voicemail from Sugar, his sister, telling him that she misses him. The episode ends with Carmy returning to the beach to take in its serene beauty. The scene moves to Marcus, who is captivated by the sight of beautifully displayed bread at a bakery in the early morning. Outside the bakery, Richie and Carmy are seen arguing as they prepare supplies for a children's party hosted by Jimmy. Carmy is clearly not a fan of Richie's idea of promoting the event with a hot dog-shaped balloon wrapped in a cloth, even though Richie believes it's a brilliant promotional strategy. However, when Richie tries to fit the large hot dog balloon into the car, it doesn't fit, leading to a minor scuffle between the two, and the balloon bursts, leaving them with nothing to promote. Back at the restaurant, Marcus, who has big dreams of becoming a pastry chef, is impressing everyone with his latest dessert creation. Sydney and the other chefs, tasting his work, are astonished, praising how delicious his cake is, jokingly saying it's so good it's to die for. Meanwhile, Sydney checks on Tina, who is mashing potatoes, but Tina resists supervision, still not fully accepting Sydney as her boss. The scene shifts back to Carmy and Richie arriving at Jimmy's children's party to serve their hot dogs. However, upon arrival, Carmy finds himself watching Jimmy and Richie argue over Richie's failure to properly complete a task. Their argument is interrupted when Carmy asks where he can set up the food supplies. As Carmy starts preparing the food, he meets an elderly man who mistakenly believes Carmy had committed suicide. Carmy calmly explains that the person he's thinking of is actually Michael, his late brother. Richie arrives shortly afterward and helps Carmy set up, but Carmy notices that Richie has taken some anxiety pills. Richie admits he needs them to cope with his anxiety. Meanwhile, back at the restaurant, Marcus remains focused on perfecting his pastry work. Ebra, watching Marcus, is impressed by his pastry-making skills. Chester, a friend of Marcus, suddenly arrives with a book Marcus had requested. While Chester and Marcus chat, Sydney enters and inquires about Chester's presence. Chester explains that he's just delivering a book, and after bidding farewell, Sydney reassures Marcus that she will support him with whatever he needs to make his desserts. After that, Sydney continues checking on the other chefs, while Marcus diligently works on various donut flavors that, according to his colleagues, taste heavenly. At Jimmy's party, Carmy is busy serving hot dogs, and the event progresses with Carmy having to interact with several people who know him. As Jimmy's nephew, Carmy is somewhat of a familiar face at these gatherings. Things take an unexpected turn when Pete, another attendee, starts telling people that Carmy once worked as a chef at a world-class restaurant, based on something he read in an article. The dual focus continues, with Carmy at the party trying to manage his family's debts while the restaurant staff handles their day-to-day operations smoothly. As the party progresses, Carmy, Jimmy, and Richie are enjoying a laugh, but the mood shifts when Pete joins them. It's clear that the group doesn't really like Pete, and though he tries to fit in, the atmosphere becomes tense. Pete, attempting to blend in, takes a drink and starts to wonder why all the children at the party are falling asleep in the yard. No one realizes what's happening until Pete leaves, and Carmy checks the drinks, only to discover that Richie had mixed Xanax into them. This explains why the kids are knocked out. Carmy quickly informs Jimmy about the situation, but instead of being upset, Jimmy is amused, saying he's relieved he doesn't have to deal with the children's constant screaming. Back at the restaurant, Tina, feeling worn out from her tasks, is surprised by Sydney's kindness when she creates a new sauce to lighten Tina's load. Tina, initially resistant, tastes the sauce without showing it to anyone, and her expression betrays how impressed she is by how much better it is than her own version. Returning to Carmy at Jimmy's party, Carmy wraps up his work and loads his equipment. Jimmy thanks him for doing a good job, and they reminisce as Carmy looks at an old photo of his father with Jimmy. Jimmy shares a memory of a near accident where they almost hit a child while speeding in a car. Luckily, Jimmy managed to brake just in time, but Carmy's father was thrown from the vehicle. They then discuss the enormous debt of $298,500 that Carmy is trying to pay off, along with the interest and other expenses. At the restaurant, Tina asks Sydney to taste the sauce she made, hoping Sydney won't like it. To her surprise, Sydney genuinely praises her work, and this small moment softens Tina's stance towards Sydney. For the first time, Tina respectfully calls Sydney chef, signaling her acceptance of Sydney as a leader. The scene moves shows the exhausted staff of the beef tasting Marcus desserts after a long, hard day. Carmy, too, takes a bite and wholeheartedly praises Marcus' creation, calling it delicious. Marcus beams with pride, pleased to have earned Carmy's approval. Early in the morning, Sydney wakes up before dawn. Unable to fall back asleep as her mind races with images of various dishes, she decides to head to the beef restaurant ahead of schedule. After taking the train, she arrives at the restaurant, only to find that Carmy has beaten her there. They begin discussing the recent drop in sales during the evenings. Carmy admits that he agrees with Sydney's idea of revamping the menu, and they plan to discuss it further soon. As they prepare for the day, Carmy hears a strange noise coming from the restroom. Initially thinking it's a minor issue, he's caught off guard when the toilet suddenly explodes, sending water gushing out and flooding the entire area. With no other choice, Carmy calls Fack for help and instructs all the chefs to work together to clean the restaurant, as they're set to open in just a few hours. Meanwhile, he asks Tina, Ebra, and Sydney to join him in the kitchen to discuss the new menu. In the kitchen, Carmy demonstrates how to make onions aromatic and appealing to customers. He emphasizes that all chefs need to replicate his method, going step by step through each component of the dish. The result is evident as Tina's face lights up, showing her appreciation for the rich flavors in Carmy's creation. Soon after, Fack arrives to check on the bathroom situation. As he works, Richie can't help but pester him with playful pranks, irritating Fack to the point where he stops working. Fack then mentions he heard Carmy is looking for 2 new chefs and wonders if he could apply for a position at the beef and leave his repair job behind. This leaves Richie speechless. Everyone in the kitchen is busy with their tasks. Marcus is focused on baking bread, assisted by Chester, while the others prepare dishes for the day's customers. However, Fack and Richie's argument escalates when Fack expresses his desire to become a chef. Richie, doubting Fack's skills, mocks him, saying that playing the keyboard, which Fack claims is one of his talents, is far from cooking food. Their banter turns into insults, and soon enough, they are physically fighting, leaving the rest of the chefs bewildered as they try to focus on their work. Carmy, losing patience, breaks up the fight by dousing them with water, like trying to separate 2 feuding cats. Although he manages to stop them, Fack accidentally reveals a startling fact. Richie has been dealing drugs behind the restaurant. Shocked, Carmy calls a meeting with Fack and Richie. During the conversation, Richie confesses he wasn't exactly selling drugs, but distributing them in the alley behind the restaurant. He explains that the stress from the COVID pandemic led him to seek side income, as he couldn't survive solely by working at a restaurant with so much debt. At the same time, Marcus unknowingly causes a power outage in the entire restaurant when his baking machine malfunctions. While everyone panics, Richie can't help but laugh at the situation. The chefs scramble to check every room, only to discover the most crucial area, the walk-in freezer, is no longer operational, forcing them to move the perishable stock quickly. Fack assesses the damage and informs Carmy that the condenser is broken and will cost $2,000 to repair. Desperate, Carmy calls Pete, who graciously offers to lend them his cooler for temporary use. Carmy, immensely grateful, can't imagine how disastrous it would have been if the meat had spoiled. As Carmy helps move the stock, his sister, Sugar, arrives and asks to talk to him privately. Sugar expresses her frustration that Carmy asked Pete for help instead of her. She feels like he only comes to her when he's in a crisis. But Carmy, overwhelmed by the current disaster, says he doesn't want to argue. Sugar shifts the conversation, asking if their brother has attended any AA meetings. When Carmy confirms, she is moved and hugs him tightly. Back in the restaurant, Sydney, as the inventory manager, realizes there isn't much else she can do other than help move some items. With the situation grim, the team decides to sell food outside the restaurant with whatever ingredients they have left. Despite the challenges, the chefs manage to serve the customers cheerfully, and sales surprisingly don't drop. However, Carmy now faces the pressing issue of finding the money to fix the electrical system. Later, as Carmy takes a break in the alley to clear his head, he spots Marcus sitting alone, deep in thought, blaming himself for the power failure that shut down the restaurant. Carmy reassures him, sharing a personal story of how he ruined an award ceremony the night he was crowned the best chef in the world. He encourages Marcus not to dwell on the mistake and to rejoin the team in serving the customers. Afterward, Carmy talks with Fack, who jokes that they'd need $5,500 to fix everything, unless Richie goes back to selling drugs. Richie, feeling like a hero now, asks Fack to first admit that he won their earlier fight. Reluctantly, Fack agrees, and with that settled, they all get back to work. Once the restaurant is back up and running, the chefs handle the equipment with extra caution, particularly Marcus. The scene shows Sydney, now asleep, dreaming of a new recipe she's concocted. Ribs braised in Coca-Cola, served with risotto. The scene shifts to a lively family gathering, showing a joyful moment when Michael, still alive, is telling a story about his trip to Ceres. As he recounts his experience, Michael asks young Carmy to grate some Parmesan so they can serve the meal soon. Richie is there too, acting as Michael's enthusiastic supporter. Later, this same story is retold by Richie during a date with a woman. With great passion, Richie describes Michael as the perfect man, recalling how they once stayed at a bar until 7 a.m. Unfortunately, the date doesn't end well, as Richie fails to win the woman over. Frustrated, Richie returns to the restaurant and shares a photo of the woman with Tina, who thinks the woman wasn't a good match for him anyway. But Richie, being a playboy, shrugs it off and moves on without much concern. As the chefs are busy preparing for the day, Sydney approaches Carmy with a new idea. Carmy listens but feels that Sydney is not reading the situation well, as they are swamped with work. He acknowledges that he's already reviewed Sydney's resume and that her previous employer noted she tends to be impatient. Carmy reassures her that they will evaluate the new menu when the time is right. Fortunately, Sydney accepts the feedback graciously and doesn't dwell on it. Carmy then steps outside to meet with Sugar, who is visibly frustrated with the state of their family restaurant. Sugar reveals that she was recently visited by the IRS, who claim that Mike's restaurant didn't meet certain tax requirements, and now she has to deal with sorting out the documents. She asks Carmy for help in locating the 2018 payroll files. Overhearing this, Richie heads back to the restaurant to check on the tax issue. Meanwhile, as Richie and Sydney chat near the register, a gunshot suddenly shatters the restaurant window, sending everyone into a panic. Surprisingly, Richie remains calm but angry about the incident. After ensuring his colleagues are safe, he steps outside to investigate. Richie confronts a group of local thugs, but they deny being involved, claiming they just arrived in the area. Understanding the street dynamic, Richie makes a deal with the thugs, allowing them to smoke near the restaurant if they help him find out who was responsible for the shooting. After resolving the situation, Richie returns to find the chefs cleaning up the shattered glass. Meanwhile, Sugar pressures Carmy again about finding the 2018 payroll documents, reminding him that if they don't, her house will be seized. Overwhelmed, Carmy steps outside to clear his head and joins Richie for a smoke. They discuss the missing payroll documents, and Richie admits that he and Mike were never good at handling paperwork. Their conversation shifts when Richie shares a personal story about his daughter asking about the meaning of their last name, which, according to her mother, means bearer of bad news. Richie is upset that his ex-wife has passed on this negative sentiment, further straining his relationship with his daughter. Not wanting to dwell on his sadness for too long, Richie heads back inside, urging Tina to open the restaurant so they can focus on work and forget their troubles for a while. As the chefs start serving orders, Sydney, with her characteristic ambition, asks Carmy to taste her new dish. Though Carmy and the other chefs agree that the food is delicious, Carmy advises her to be patient, as they aren't ready to make it a mainstay on the menu yet. Despite his advice, Sydney sneaks the dish onto the menu as an extra option for customers. Meanwhile, Carmy and Sugar continue searching for the 2018 payroll documents, and amid the search, they get into another argument. Sugar confronts Carmy about his distant behavior, accusing him of never reaching out to check on her. Carmy remains silent, acknowledging that he's never been good at being close to his siblings, not even with Mike. Sugar warns Carmi that running the restaurant will consume him over time, but Carmi remains hopeful, determined to restore the legacy of the restaurant his late brother left behind. Finally, Carmi breaks his silence, asking Sugar how she's doing, and in that moment, they find the missing payroll slips from 2018. As the restaurant buzzes with activity, another disturbance breaks out outside. This time, Richie scrambles to find his gun, fearing another dangerous situation. However, Sydney steps in, taking charge and shouting for everyone to stop arguing. She defuses the tension by introducing herself and asking others to do the same. Before Richie can intervene with his gun, he realizes Sydney has already resolved the conflict by offering sandwiches to the gangsters. She even agrees to give them drinks as long as they promise to stop causing trouble. With the chaos calmed, the chefs return to their work. Richie, however, can't help but stir things up, attempting to distract Tina with idle chatter. Tina, annoyed, shoos him away, insisting he let her work. Richie confides in her that he's still unsure about the young chefs running Mike's legacy restaurant. He admits that he's been considering leaving the restaurant, though he has no idea where to go or what to do next. The scene moves to Carmi looking pleased at how the chefs have managed to work together, communicating effectively and running the kitchen smoothly. Outside, Richie watches as the police arrest the gangsters who had been lingering near the restaurant, bringing a sense of closure to the day's conflicts. The scene opens with a view of Chicago, a city once notorious for its chaos and crime, now transformed into a thriving hub of commerce and urban life. People are conducting transactions, and the city's growth is evident everywhere. Carmi walks into the Beef and hears Ebra reading aloud an article about their restaurant. The article contains some negative reviews, but a few food critics praise the restaurant, especially highlighting their sandwiches as particularly enjoyable. With a busy day ahead, Carmi asks everyone to focus and get to work. Meanwhile, Sydney attempts to explain her reasoning behind a new menu item, insisting she had no idea who the man reviewing them was. Fortunately, Carmi brushes it off, telling Sydney to get ready for the day. Carmi instructs all the chefs to start inventorying their supplies. As they all finish, Marcus lags behind, still preoccupied with perfecting his donuts, which frustrates Carmi. Tensions rise when Richie arrives, questioning the new menu item that had been reviewed. Sydney, feeling insulted by Richie's comments, tries to defend herself, escalating the situation. Their argument intensifies, and the two decide to settle it privately. At the register, just before customers start coming in, Richie confronts Sydney, asking why she's really working at the Beef. Is she truly committed, or is she trying to ruin Mike's legacy? Sydney, offended again, snaps back, mocking Richie for not even being able to use his phone to take orders. Carmi, exhausted by the bickering, attempts to intervene when he hears a commotion coming from the kitchen. He rushes back to discover a massive order that they have to prepare immediately. It turns out to be a pre-booked order consisting of 78 slices of chocolate cake, 99 portions of fries, 54 servings of chicken, 38 salads, and a staggering 255 beef sandwiches, all due in just 8 minutes. The whole fiasco is Sydney's mistake. Furious, Carmi orders everyone to work overtime. The volume of the order is impossible to fulfill in such a short time, but they push forward, trying to manage the chaos. However, the tension between Richie and Sydney continues, as both of them keep provoking each other. Meanwhile, Carmi is busy yelling at the chefs to wrap the hundreds of sandwiches they need to complete. As Sydney is supposed to prep the vegetables, Richie keeps pestering her, pushing Sydney to the edge. In a moment of anger, she threatens him with a knife. The chaos isn't confined to them. While Carmi struggles to handle the overwhelming orders, Marcus tries to grab his attention to ask about the donuts he just finished. Furious at Marcus's misplaced priorities, Carmi throws the donuts and orders him to help the others immediately. The breaking point comes when Sydney, in the heat of their argument, accidentally stabs Richie in the buttocks. Shocked and silent, Sydney puts on new shoes, grabs her bag, and tells Carmi she's leaving the restaurant. Sydney walks out of the Beef, leaving behind the turmoil she helped create, unwilling to accept full responsibility for the disaster. The scene opens with Carmy acting as though he's in a dramatic soap opera, sarcastically mocking the pathetic state of the beef, the restaurant that Mike left him after taking his own life. Carmy tells the audience that he was once a great chef, but this is just a dream sequence, interrupted when a bear suddenly roars at him, startling him awake. He wakes up surrounded by pictures of dishes that haunt his thoughts. After getting up and cleaning himself, Carmy heads to an Al-Anon meeting, where the leader invites anyone to share their experiences. Carmy raises his hand, introducing himself and explaining why he's there. He confesses that his brother, Mike, was an addict before his suicide. Carmy talks about how he was once a chef at one of the world's best restaurants, but Mike's death left him with a failing diner. Carmy recalls how he and Mike bonded over cooking when they were younger, dreaming of opening a restaurant together. But Mike eventually pushed Carmy away, banning him from the kitchen for reasons unknown, leaving Carmy feeling worthless. Determined to prove Mike wrong, Carmy had promised himself he would make their parents proud, which he did when he became a successful chef. But he left that life behind to take over the beef after Mike's death. Now, here he is, trying to make sense of the mess Mike left behind. The scene shifts to the beef, where Carmy gathers the staff to deliver both good and bad news. The good news: they can still serve sandwiches for lunch. The bad news: they'll have to stop service early for a private party hosted by Jimmy, meaning fewer portions to prepare for dinner. Meanwhile, Sydney invites Marcus over to her place for dinner, both feeling the sting of Carmy's wrath from the previous chaos. That night, Sydney prepares dinner for Marcus, sharing stories about her journey to becoming a chef. She talks about how she spent her last dollar on the best meals in the world after dropping out of an international culinary school. As they eat, Marcus asks if she plans on returning to the beef. He admits he intends to go back and talk things out with Carmy, but Sydney isn't sure if she's ready. She might look for work elsewhere. Both agree, though, that Carmy's cooking is some of the best they've ever had. Back at the beef, Carmy retreats to his office, overwhelmed by the debts Mike left behind. Tina, noticing his distress, asks if he's okay. Carmy opens up about the financial mess, but Tina doesn't know much about it. She recalls how Mike had once refused to buy simple things like napkins for the staff, and how she had to push him to treat his chefs better. She reminds Carmy that, despite everything, her love for Mike will always be remembered. Meanwhile, Marcus and Sydney finish their meal. Afterward, Marcus wonders if Sydney will ever return to the beef, as he plans to go back. Sydney is still unsure but contemplates her next move. The night of Jimmy's party arrives, and after serving the guests, Richie and Carmy step outside to smoke. They talk about their regrets, especially Richie's deep regret that he couldn't stop Mike's drug addiction. Richie even wishes he had handcuffed Mike to prevent him from spiraling. But it's too late now, and all they can do is accept that Mike is gone. Their conversation is cut short by a commotion inside the restaurant. They rush in, trying to break up the fight, but things escalate. Carmy gets punched, and Richie, in a moment of rage, retaliates, knocking the man unconscious. Richie is taken to jail, awaiting the man's recovery, fearing a potential murder charge if the man doesn't wake up. He makes a phone call to his ex-wife, simply telling her he just wanted to let her know he's finished with his work for the night. The next morning, Richie is woken up by the police, who inform him that the man regained consciousness. Relieved, Richie is released from jail. He quickly rushes to find Carmy, who had fallen asleep in the waiting room, and they both return to the beef to clean up the mess. Back at the restaurant, Richie is warmly welcomed by Tina, who's already heard about the previous night's drama. As they get back to work, Marcus also returns, ready to resume his role in the kitchen. Carmy announces that they'll need to put in extra effort that day because of a festival happening in the neighborhood. While preparing, Carmy stumbles upon a hidden note containing a recipe behind the pencil holder. This discovery seems to spark something in Carmy. He steps up the pace, especially after a delivery of pork arrives. While waiting for the meat to cook, however, Carmy experiences another panic attack, nearly setting the restaurant on fire. Luckily, the team catches it in time and puts out the flames, with Richie telling Carmy to take a breather. Once Carmy is calm, Richie hands him an envelope containing a letter from Mike. Carmy slips away to a quiet alley to read it. In the letter, Mike tells Carmy to always remember what he used to say. Enclosed is a family recipe for homemade spaghetti. Inspired by the letter, Carmy decides to make the dish for the staff's lunch. As he prepares the sauce, Carmy is shocked to find bundles of cash hidden inside the cans of tomatoes, neatly wrapped stacks of dollar bills. He calls the chefs to help open all the cans, discovering even more money stashed inside. That day, the kitchen is abuzz with the unexpected task of uncovering the hidden fortune. At that very moment, Sydney, who has decided to return, walks in and is shocked by the scene. Carmy simply smiles and tells her, "We can build a much better restaurant now, the one we always dreamed of." In the final scene of Season 1, Carmy makes the decision to close the beef and officially introduces the Bear, the new restaurant they plan to open soon. As a final gesture, he shares a meal of his family's homemade spaghetti with the entire team. This is the end of Season 1 of The Bear. Like, comment, and subscribe so I will soon make a recap of Season 2 for The Bear. Thank you for watching.